Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel where I bring you new videos every Friday looking at the events of the past from anywhere, anytime. Today on History Calling, the theme is going to be Hollywood versus history. Specifically, I'm going to compare three of the most famous modern depictions of the execution of Anne Boleyn to the real historical record and to each other to see which was the most accurate and what each one got right and wrong. The three portrayals I've chosen are Showtime's The Tudors, starring Natalie Dormer as Anne, the 2008 film The Other Boleyn Girl, starring Natalie Portman, and the BBC's 2015 production of Wolf Hall, starring Claire Foy. I won't be showing anything gruesome, but we are going to take a deep dive into what I think is the most famous execution in history and separate out fact from fiction. If this video puts you in the mood to rewatch any of these shows or the film, there are links in the description box so that you can stream them or purchase the DVDs. We know from the historical record that Queen Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII, was executed at the Tower of London on the 19th of May 1536 on a scaffold draped in black, which stood in between the central White Tower, which you can still see today, and the modern entrance to the building where the crown jewels are now kept. None of the three depictions under discussion here filmed at the Tower, and even if they had, the structures don't quite look the same today as they did in the 16th century. Nevertheless, they all correctly show Anne on a scaffold, though none have it draped in black, and all do a decent job of making you believe you're in the Tower. The cameras are arranged in such a way that you don't tend to get a good view of the entire space, because that would obviously give away the fact that it isn't the real location. However, a shot of Anne's view as she ascends the scaffold from the Tudors and an aerial shot from the Other Boleyn Girl, with Anne's body blocked out to keep YouTube happy, gives a good impression, I think, of being in between two sets of buildings. In Wolf Hall, you generally just see her with a building wall directly behind her and no wider angle to show the rest of the area. It is alone amongst the three in showing Anne doling out alms as she approaches the scaffold too. I've never seen a primary source which says she did this, nor does her biographer, Eric Ives, mention it, but let me know in the comments if you know where this detail comes from, assuming it isn't just fictitious. There was a fairly large crowd present at Anne's death of perhaps 1,000 to 2,000 people, but none of our three depictions show this many spectators. They do sometimes, however, include some people who were genuinely present. Wolf Hall, for instance, shows that Cromwell was there, and the Tudors has Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, in attendance. The Other Boleyn Girl, however, has Mary Boleyn in the crowd, Anne's sister, which is completely false. If you're interested, other people who were there include Henry VIII's illegitimate son Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond, the Duke of Norfolk, and the Lord Chancellor Thomas Audley. By combining a number of different sources, we can say that Anne had 4 ladies with her on the scaffold. No source gives their names, though one claims that they were the same women who attended her in the Tower. Another, later writer, says that she gave them keepsakes just before she died. Also present was the captain or constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, and of course the unnamed executioner, who was a swordsman from Calais. Anne didn't have any religious man with her. None of our three portrayals get this information correct. The Tudors has 3 women, Kingston, the executioner, and a chaplain. The Other Boleyn Girl presents 2 women and 4 men, one of whom is a soldier and another a minister. But it's Wolf Hall which deviates furthest from the records, by showing 5 women and a veritable host of men on the edge of the scaffold. Next, let's think about what Anne was wearing. Original sources vary slightly here, so you'll see different descriptions even in the modern secondary works on her, depending on which primary source they favoured. One, which was used by Antonia Fraser in her book on Henry's wives, says that she wore a nightrobe of damask with a red damask skirt and netted coif over her hair. I don't find this source, which is Martin Hume's Chronicle of King Henry VIII, particularly reliable on its own though, as it also says other things which we know to be false, including that Anne's father died a few days after her. A French writer, however, confirms a nightrobe of grey damask and coif, whilst a Portuguese observer described a robe of black damask made in such guise that the cape, which was white, did fall on the outer side thereof. Before her death, a linen cap and blindfold were added. A letter in the Venetian archives says much the same, noting a short mantle furred with ermines over her dress with an English-style gable hood on her head and, after the hood was removed, a linen cap and a blindfold. Eric Ives also states that her collar was low-cut at the back so as not to impede the sword. Looking at our three Annes, Natalie Dormer's outfit is the least true to the sources. She has a fur-lined cloak, however it's full length rather than short, and it isn't white. She does don a cap towards the end of the scene, and her dress is low-cut at the back, but it's in the wrong colour and there's never any blindfold. Natalie Portman is much more historically accurate. She has a dark-coloured dress with a low back and a short white cloak with fur, just like the Venetian and Portuguese descriptions. She also wears a cap, though we don't see it being put on, and is the only one who wears an English hood. Like the Tudors, though, there's never any blindfold here. In Wolf Hall, Claire Foy has a dark dress, the back of which we don't see, a fur-lined cape, though again it's full length and only the trim is white, and she later acquires a cap. Her headdress is very strange to me though, as it's neither an English gable hood or the French hood, which was also popular at this time, and both of which we know Anne wore at different points in her life. I remember watching this show the first time it aired, and I still think now what I thought then, which is that this piece of her costume most closely resembles a modern hairband with some jewels and a veil stuck on the back of it. This is particularly odd to me as you can see other actresses in this shot wearing the correct style of hoods, so the costume department obviously knew how to make English and French hoods, they just decided not to give Claire Foy one. She is, however, the only one who is blindfolded, which is a detail you often don't see in portrayals of Anne's death, possibly because actors find it easier to act with their eyes uncovered, so they do get points for that. Before her death, Anne made a final speech to the assembled crowd. There are numerous accounts of her words and her composure while she spoke, some more detailed than others, so get comfy while I take you through them, and at the end you can decide for yourself which you think is the best and the most accurate. Hume's Chronicle, which I mentioned a minute ago, gives what is perhaps the most unreliable account, which bears little resemblance to any other. It has Anne declaring, "Do not think, good people, that I am sorry to die, or that I have done anything to deserve this death. My fault has been my great pride, and the great crime I committed in getting the king to leave my mistress Queen Catherine for my sake, and I pray God to pardon me for it. I say to you all that everything they have accused me of is false, and the principal reason I am to die is Jane Seymour, as I was the cause of the ill that befell my mistress." I firmly believe that this is rubbish. Had Anne made such an incendiary speech, there would be many records of it. Thankfully, none of the TV shows and the movie we're looking at here use this. The other records we have of her words more or less tally with each other and have Anne behaving in a much more conciliatory manner. The Venetian archives say only that she began to raise her eyes to heaven and cry mercy to God and to the king for the offence she had done, desiring the people always to pray to God for the king, for he was a good, gentle, gracious, and amiable prince. Lancelot Carl, who was secretary to the French ambassador, reported that she begged her hearers to forgive her if she had not used them all with becoming gentleness, and asked for their prayers. It was needless, she said, to relate why she was there, but she prayed the judge of all the world to have compassion on those who had condemned her, and she begged them to pray for the king, in whom she had always found great kindness, fear of God, and love of his subjects. Charles Risley, in his Chronicle of England during the reigns of the Tudors, has her say, "Masters, I here humbly submit me to the law, as the law hath judged me. And as for mine offences, I here accuse no man. God knoweth them, I remit them to God, beseeching him to have mercy on my soul. And I beseech Jesu, save my sovereign and master the king, the most goodly, noble, and gentle prince that is, and long to reign over you." It is a very slightly modernised and condensed version of this speech which Natalie Portman delivers in The Other Boleyn Girl, and so again this production has stuck with a primary source and can't really be faulted, as the changes to the speech are so minimal and mostly to make it easier for a 21st century audience to understand. The Portuguese account of her speech is more detailed and reads as follows. "Good friends, I am not come here to excuse or to justify myself, for as much as I know full well that aught that I could say in my defence doth not appertain unto you, and that I could draw no hope of life from the same. But I come here only to die, and thus to yield myself humbly to the will of the King, my Lord. And if in my life I did ever offend the King's grace, surely with my death I do now atone. And I blame not my judges, nor any other manner of person, nor anything save the cruel law of the land by which I die. But be this, and be my faults as they may, I beseech you all, good friends, to pray for the life of the King, my sovereign lord, and yours, who is one of the best princes on the face of the earth, and who hath always treated me so well that better could not be. Wherefore I submit to death with a good will, humbly asking pardon of all the world. In his book, The History of the Reigns of Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Queen Mary, Francis Bacon gives a similarly detailed account, though it's not quite the same as the Portuguese transcript. Friends and good Christian people, I am here in your presence to suffer death, whereto I acknowledge myself adjudged by the laws. How justly, I will not say, for I intend not an accusation of any one. I beseech the Almighty to preserve his majesty long to reign over you. A more gentle or mild prince never swayed sceptre. His bounty and clemency towards me, I am sure, hath been especial. If any one intend an inquisitive survey of my actions, I entreat him to judge favourably of me, and not rashly to admit of any hard, censorious conceit. And so I bid the world farewell, beseeching you to commend me in your prayers to God. To thee, God, do I commend my soul. Perhaps the most famous rendering of her speech is found in Edward Hall's Chronicle and Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland. It was also used in the writings of John Foxe, who wrote the famous Book of Martyrs, and in the 17th century book The Life and Reign of King Henry VIII by Edward Herbert, Baron Herbert of Cherbury. In it, Anne says, Good Christian people, I am come hither to die. For according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the King, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world, and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul. This version of the speech is the one used by Wolfe Hall, and is therefore completely accurate to the primary sources, and for me is the best, most detailed depiction of Anne's execution speech. My main gripe with how Wolfe Hall shows this is that it cuts away from Anne for parts of the speech, so we just hear her talking in the background. There's also a very slight issue with her demeanour, but I'll come to that in a minute. That leaves us with the Tudors. If you listen to what Natalie Dormer says, her script is clearly a composite of the Portuguese account and that written by Hall/Holinshed, with some alterations made to accommodate a modern audience. While it therefore gives you a flavour of what the real Anne said, it isn't following any single source, which weakens it in my view, though Miss Dormer gives an excellent performance. As for the actions of Anne and those who were with her on the scaffold, again there's variation in the contemporary descriptions. Charles Risley keeps it short by saying that once her speech was done, she knelt down, said, "To Jesu Christ I commend my soul," then the swordsman executed her with a single stroke. Her body and head were apparently later buried in the choir of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula that afternoon. Edward Hall's chronicle is similar, saying that after the main speech she knelt down and repeated the words, "To Christ I commend my soul, Jesus receive my soul," until she was beheaded. Francis Bacon agrees with this sequence of events, but the Venetian report gives a little more detail, writing that after her speech her mantle was taken off, Anne herself removed her hood, and it was only then that she put on her linen cap, which was supplied by one of her women. She then, quote, knelt down, fastening her clothes about her feet, and one of the said ladies bandaged her eyes. There is no mention of Anne's prayers. Instead, immediately the executioner did his office, and when her head was off, it was taken by a young lady and covered with a white cloth. Afterwards, the body was taken by the other ladies, and the whole carried into the church nearest to the Tower of London. Lancelot de Carl says that the spectators could not refrain from tears, while the Portuguese observer gives a lot more detail than is found elsewhere, saying that after her speech, Anne removed her coifs, which I take to mean her headdress, from her head and replaced them with a linen cap supplied by one of her female attendants, saying, "Alas, poor head! In a very brief space thou wilt roll in the dust on this scaffold, and as in life thou didst not merit to wear the crown of a queen, so in death thou deservest not a better doom than this. And ye, my damsels, who, whilst I lived, ever showed yourselves so diligent in my service, and who are now to be present at my last hour and mortal agony, as in good fortune ye were faithful to me, so even at this my miserable death ye do not forsake me. And as I cannot reward you your true service to me, I pray you take comfort for my loss, howbeit forget me not, and be always faithful to the King's grace, and to her who with happier fortune you may have as your queen and mistress. And esteem your honour far beyond your life, and in your prayers to the Lord Jesu, forget not to pray for my soul." This is obviously a lot of extra material, so much so that I doubt Anne really said much, if any, of this, as surely one of the other sources would have mentioned this second speech to her women had it occurred. It does help to explain why some sources have claimed that the ladies with Anne were the same as those women who attended her during her imprisonment, though. Having added this second speech in, the Portuguese account then returns to the sequence of events laid out in other sources, saying that Anne knelt down, was blindfolded by one of her ladies, and that lady then withdrew with the others to cry at the edge of the scaffold. The Queen was then executed after saying, "O Lord God, have pity on my soul." This account adds that there was a chest ready on the scaffold to receive the body, which was quickly covered with a sheet and placed in it by her women, who then carried her to the chapel for burial. It is from the dubious Hume Chronicle that we get Anne's supposed interaction with the executioner. He writes that after she had been prevented from saying anything further and refused to confess to any crimes, the headsman came and kneeled next to her, begging pardon for what he had to do. She then knelt with no blindfold, and because she kept looking around her, the executioner distracted her by calling to someone, "Bring me the sword." As Anne looked around, he pulled it out from beneath some straw and struck. Our three on-screen depictions are all combinations of these sources. The Tudors takes pieces of the Venetian, Portuguese and Hume accounts, showing Anne being made ready by her crying ladies and talking to the headsman before kneeling, praying, having her hair adjusted by the executioner, which didn't happen, then being distracted by him at the moment of death. It also has the crowd kneeling with her, which I haven't seen any source for. The Other Boleyn Girl also mixes fact with fiction, as it includes a completely fabricated, non-verbal interaction with her sister Mary, as Anne loses all hope of a reprieve. She then removes her own headdress to reveal the coif already in place beneath, and takes off her cape and famous bee necklace, which there's no suggestion she was actually wearing, before handing them all to a lady behind her. She is then pushed down to her knees by the swordsman, again a total invention, says a quick prayer, and is swiftly executed. Wolf Hall has her made ready by her ladies, who remove her cloak before her speech and her headdress afterwards, by which point she is already kneeling. They then place the coif over her hair, and a blindfold is presented by the executioner of all people, which seems like an odd deviation from all historical records to me. She then prays, and there is a totally unnecessary gasp by the crowd when the executioner pulls out the sword. Bear in mind, these are people who would have seen many executions in their time, even if not by sword. The executioner slips off his shoes so Anne can't hear him move, and distracts her to get her to turn her head to the side, which seems pointless given that she's blindfolded in this adaptation and he can move around her unseen and unheard. It does include the aftermath of her death, however, with her ladies removing her body and a chest already present, a detail which clearly comes from the Portuguese account. All three portrayals show her dying by the sword and kneeling upright, which is factually correct. With regard to Anne's demeanour on the scaffold, the original sources are pretty much unanimous that she was very brave. The Spanish ambassador Eustace Chapuis, who hated her guts, nevertheless said that no one ever showed more courage or greater readiness to meet death than she did. Charles Risley said that she gave her speech with a goodly smiling countenance, while the Venetian archives say that she looked frequently behind her, and when she got upon the scaffold was very much exhausted and amazed, hardly surprising as she likely hadn't slept the night before. Lancelot de Carl admitted that she initially spoke with a voice somewhat overcome by weakness, but which gathered strength as she went on, and added that she looked untroubled and had never been more beautiful. Hume's Chronicle, for what it's worth, says that she showed a devilish spirit and was gay as if she was not going to die. Given these sources, for me personally, the most inaccurate portrayal on this point is Natalie Portman. Whether as a result of her own acting decisions or the instructions she got from the director or the script, she played Anne as a sobbing wreck. This didn't happen, and while it might well be how any of us would act in such circumstances, Anne did a remarkable job of maintaining her composure, which I think deserves to be recognised when she's portrayed. This is no criticism of the acting abilities of the incredibly talented Miss Portman, who is in fact one of my favourite actresses. I just don't think she was well served by her direction and script here. If you'd like to see a better example of her playing a real-life figure, I'd recommend the movie Jackie, in which she plays Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and I'll leave a link for that in the description box. As for Claire Foy, she does a beautiful job of showing Anne holding it together, but with her fear just breaking through at certain moments, and I think she puts across Anne's exhaustion the best, even if she doesn't show her almost relaxed countenance, instead displaying an obvious strain. She comes in a very close second, in my opinion. The reason she isn't first is that I dislike the decision to show her shaking so hard and speaking so nervously and quietly throughout that the audience struggled to hear her. There is no report of such a problem in real life, even if de Carl did note her voice as being initially weak, and I think as a result she just didn't quite capture the level of calmness that Anne reportedly had. Again, though, she's a fantastic actress, and she will have been bound to a certain extent by what the director and the script told her to do. What I would also add about Wolf Hall is that I think it does, by far, the best job of demonstrating the horror of the whole situation and not romanticising it with a loud, swelling soundtrack or flashbacks to Anne's childhood as we see in the Tudors and or the Other Boleyn Girl. On to Natalie Dormer, whose performance of Anne at her execution is my favourite. She shows her as being very calm and composed and someone who is at peace with her fate, as Anne reportedly was, for she told William Kingston that she had long been prepared for death and even asked that it not be delayed for any reason, details which the Tudors does show in earlier scenes, by the way. I've always assumed that Miss Dormer read the sources I cited a minute ago and incorporated them into her performance, as she delivered the speech with a steady voice which increased in strength as she went on, and the goodly, even smiling countenance that Risley noted. She does shed a few tears and we see some moments of nervousness, but it's very restrained, and overall I think she does the best job of capturing the real Anne. So, final thoughts. I think the Other Boleyn Girl is the weakest of the three depictions I've looked at here, mostly because of Anne's demeanour and the ridiculous subplot of Mary Boleyn being present and receiving a letter from Henry while she's in the crowd. The costume is good though, and the speech and many of Anne's actions are accurate. As for Wolf Hall and the Tudors, it's hard to choose between them. Wolf Hall does a better job with the speech and the costume, and it doesn't sentimentalise events in the way that I think the other two do, but Natalie Dormer gives what I consider the most accurate portrayal of Anne's demeanour, and though I question the accuracy of some of the details shown, in particular Anne's interaction with the headsman, they are drawn from a primary source, even if it's of doubtful reliability. I think Wolf Hall takes the crown, no pun intended, for accuracy, while Natalie Dormer is the best Anne of the three. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, however. Which depiction of the execution do you think is the best, and who is your favourite Anne? Perhaps she's not even one I've shown you here. Maybe you favour Genevieve Bujold from Anne of the Thousand Days, Helena Bonham Carter from the BBC's Henry VIII in 2003, or the recent Channel 5 series on her final months in which she was played by Jodie Turner-Smith. Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, why not give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on so you never miss my uploads. You can also follow me on Instagram, where my username is HistoryCalling, and there's a link for that in the description box. If you're a Tudor nerd, you'll be happy to know you're in the right place. I already have a whole playlist dedicated to the 6 wives of Henry VIII and another looking at all the Tudor monarchs, so why not check those out next? They're linked on screen as well as below the video, where there are also links to all the shows, movies and books I've mentioned today, and a few extra. I'll be back next week with a new video, but until then, keep learning.